All right, today we're jumping right into a really powerful and honestly pretty intense passage from the book of Isaiah, chapter 5. We're going to explore this prophecy of judgment by breaking it down verse by verse, using our source material to really decode all the potent imagery and historical context packed inside.
Okay, so let's get into it. We start with Isaiah chapter 5, verse 25, and right off the bat, the tone is incredibly grim. This isn't just some random declaration. Our source explains that this is actually the climax of a whole series of warnings to the people of Judah for casting away the law. And the judgment described here is just, wow, severe. We're talking trembling hills and bodies left in the streets.
Now let's zoom in on that very last phrase. His hand is stretched out still. You might hear that and think, oh, maybe that's a sign of mercy, an offer of hope. But our source makes it really clear that in this context, it's the exact opposite. This is a hand stretched out to continue carrying out justice and judgment. The sentence has been passed, and it's not over yet.
The imagery Isaiah uses is just so visceral. Take the phrase trembling hills. The source explains this isn't some random earthquake. No, it's a poetic and frankly terrifying metaphor for an invading military force on the move. Can you imagine an army so vast, so powerful, that the very ground shakes as it approaches? That's the picture being painted here.
So how is this judgment actually put into motion? Well, that brings us to verse 26. The prophet tells us that the Lord doesn't just act directly. Instead, he calls upon a specific instrument, a foreign nation from a faraway land, to carry out the sentence.
And verse 26 here is just packed with really fascinating symbolic language that our source material helps us unpack. There are two words in particular we need to look at, ensign and hiss. They're key to understanding how this divine summons works.
First up, the ensign. The best way to think about this is like a massive banner or a flag raised up high on a hill. It's a signal that can't be missed, a divine call to arms for a distant nation, telling them, it's time. Assemble your armies. It's what sets this whole invasion in motion.
Then you have the word hissing, which is just a brilliant metaphor. Our source points to the ancient practice of beekeeping, where a beekeeper could use a specific sound, a hiss or a whistle, to call an entire swarm out of the hive. The idea here is that God can summon this mighty, destructive army just as effortlessly as a beekeeper summons his bees. It shows an incredible level of command and control.
So who is this army that's answering the call? Well, the next part of the prophecy in verses 27 through 29 gives us a profile of an invincible, unstoppable, invading force. And this isn't just any army. They're portrayed as a terrifyingly efficient, almost supernatural machine.
Verse 27 describes the soldiers themselves, and they are absolutely relentless. Look at this list. They're never tired, they never stumble, they don't even sleep. Our source points out that they come so fast, it's as if they never even stop to rest or loosen their belts. They are just a single-minded force, constantly moving toward their target. And the description in verse 28 gets even more intense. This isn't just a military force, it's a force of nature, a storm. Their arrows are sharp, their bows are always ready. The sound of their horses' hooves is compared to flint, that hard, sharp stone. And their chariot wheels move like a whirlwind. You can almost hear the chaos.
The final metaphor, here in verse 29, is maybe the most frightening of all. The army's war cry is like the roar of a lion that has seized its prey. And in this case, the prey is the people of Judah. The point is crystal clear. Once this army grabs hold, there is no escape. None shall deliver it. It's a statement of absolute finality.
Okay, so you hear all this, and you have to ask, who is Isaiah talking about? Who is this invading army? To get a clue, our source tells us we actually need to jump forward in time a bit and look at another book, the book of Jeremiah, for a crucial piece of the puzzle.
So Jeremiah, writing about 80 years after Isaiah, is incredibly direct. He doesn't really leave much room for interpretation. In this passage, the text says, the Lord has given all the surrounding lands to one specific ruler, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, who is even called my servant here.
And as you can see from this next verse, a very clear ultimatum was given to all the kingdoms in the area, including Judah. The deal was simple: serve Nebuchadnezzar or face total destruction by sword, famine, and disease. The choice was incredibly stark, and the consequences couldn't be more dire.
This was the exact message delivered straight to Zedekiah, the king of Judah. The path to survival was right there, laid out for him. Submit to Babylon and live.
But, as our source material points out, Zedekiah refused. He chose to rebel instead.
And because that warning from Jeremiah was ignored, because the king chose rebellion, well, the devastating aftermath that Isaiah described all those years ago finally unfolds. The prophecy comes true in a wave of darkness and sorrow.
Isaiah chapter 5, verse 30 describes the final outcome. That roar of the army, once like a lion, is now like the roaring of a massive sea that's just engulfing the entire land. The result is a nation plunged into total despair, a place of such darkness that it's as if even the light from the sky has been snuffed out. And our source notes this period of darkness would go on for about 60 years, all the way until the return from exile.
So all of this brings us back to that central question of interpretation. Who exactly was this invading army Isaiah prophesied about? Our source gives us a primary candidate, which is strongly supported by that cross-reference to Jeremiah, but it also mentions an alternative way of looking at it.
The source definitely leans heavily toward Babylon, led by Nebuchadnezzar, as the direct fulfillment of this prophecy. The timeline of about 80 years works, and an earlier invasion by the Assyrians doesn't quite fit because they never managed to fully conquer Jerusalem. But it's also noted that some commentators see this as a kind of pattern or a type that could also point to the later Roman invasion, especially since that phrase from the end of the earth could arguably describe the vast Roman Empire even better.
And there's one last, really important clarification our source provides. That word ensign, the banner we talked about, the one raised here in chapter 5, is a call to war, a summons for judgment. It's completely different from another ensign mentioned later in Isaiah chapter 11, which is a banner for the peaceful gathering and restoration of Israel. So you have two very similar symbols being used for two completely different purposes.
So when you step back and look at it, this deep dive into just 6 verses shows you how prophecy, history, and these powerful metaphors can all weave together to deliver a potent message about cause and effect. And it really leaves us with a final question to chew on. What do these intense narratives of judgment from ancient texts really reveal about a culture's deeply held views on justice, accountability, and consequence?